Hey everybody, welcome into the back room. I'm Andy Ostroy. We have filmmaker Andrew Goldberg with us today. We'll chat with Andrew in just a moment, but first, thanks for tuning in. We appreciate you listening, and we'd love to hear your comments. So email us at backroomandy@gmail.com and or post on our social media, and we'll read some feedback next time. And if you like the podcast, please follow or subscribe and rate and review, and you'll be notified every time we post a new episode. So Andrew Goldberg is an Emmy Award-winning investigative producer, has directed 14 primetime documentary specials for PBS, and both long and short-form segments for CBS Sunday Morning, ABC News, Live from Lincoln Center, NPR, and others. His films include The Armenian Genocide, Anti-Semitism in the 21st Century, The Resurgence, and The Iranian Americans. His work has appeared on major networks on every continent and has been supported by more than 250 foundations, corporations, and major donors around the world. His new film is the documentary White with Fear, which he wrote, produced, and directed, and is now streaming on PBS, Apple, Amazon, and other platforms. Andrew, welcome into the back room.
Thank you so much. Glad to be here. Appreciate it.
Congratulations on this film. It's called White with Fear. It is truly terrific, and if I may say, it's pretty fucking terrifying in many ways as well. I just want to know, what the heck are white people so afraid of?
You know, I think, first of all, I think fear is, in fact, Carl Cameron says it in the film, he says, fear is a great motivator. You know, how many of us are propelled through our lives by anxiety and fear? I mean, it's a central operating, unit of everyone's day-to-day life. You know, how do I cross the street? I don't want to get hit by a car. You know, I better save some more money. I better wear a warmer coat. I mean, it is like anxiety is so central to what we do. And I think that politicians have recognized that, you know, leaning into happiness does not sell. Right. Leaning into joy does not win elections. If you could somehow make people happy the way a drug could, maybe they would respond to you. But no one's figured out how to do that with messaging. So the one thing that they know they can do is they can scare the heck out of you. They can get those chemicals in your brain to pump out more anxiety, whatever it's called, hormones into your head. They can't get anything else to flow as freely as the fear one. So they scare you to death, and then they offer you the solution. Vote for me.
Yeah. Well, but what we're talking about today is white people losing their minds over this replacement fear, which is the subject of your film, where the racial animus that we're experiencing today is just on steroids. How do you explain that?
You know, a lot of us read the book The Star-Bellied Tniches by Dr. Seuss when we were kids. And, you know, it's this story about, you know, one group has the stars on their stomach and the other doesn't. There's an in-group and an out-group. And I think a lot of people just build their identities around this. You know, it's the whole thing of, you know, if you go back far enough in time, people organize their communities around whether it was family or a language. There's this old story, a nation is just a group of boundaries and a language. And that is enough to make them fight the other. I think it's a very sort of natural thing in our brain. To not be a bigot is a learned behavior. If you just sort of, you know, put people into groups, they ultimately start to organize around different identifying processes and properties. I don't know what those all are, but for whatever reason, we organize around these ethnic and color lines. And maybe it's because that's what we're told. And we end up, you know, at war with each other. I mean, it's the basis of how so many countries have defined their borders. It's a scary thing. And the great American experiment, right, is both a success and a failure, because it's a success because we're the best at it, but it's also a failure because it isn't working well enough. And that's the scary part. And by the way, we're probably not the best at it anymore. I think we thought we were. It was easy when we were merging Germans, Irish, Italians, Greek, and French people, and Irish and English, because they all kind of looked the same.
In the film, you touch on this idea of like a white fear industrial complex. How deep and how powerful do you think that movement is?
I think that the entire American conservative media system has it baked in. I mean, there are plenty of parts where it isn't, but when you see someone like the head of the Heritage Foundation defending, things that are defending a person who's ultimately extremely anti-Semitic, that's kind of new in our lifetimes. Now, if you go back far enough, you'll hear politicians using extreme racial language. That I mean, especially in the South. I mean, to use the N-word in a regular political campaign wasn't surprising, in huge parts of the United States. And that was, but that was different because that was kind of assumed in a lot of those regions, and it wasn't strategically calibrated. What we pointed in the film is that at a certain point in the 1960s, the presidential political machine recognizes that to lean into the biggest hatred of all in America, which is the hatred of black people by white people, to lean into that is the most powerful tool to win elections, and they never stop.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting what you're saying because it is true. I mean, certainly racism didn't start with Donald Trump. It didn't start in modern history. And we've had some real ugliness in this country. But what you're referring to, that was symbolic of the times. I think what is so stunning and so scary to a lot of people today is that we have come so far in terms of racial progress in this country that to experience what we're experiencing today, it really is shocking and it's unconscionable because we're starting to see how quickly one individual or 10 individuals can overturn decades and decades and decades of progress in this country. And it makes you wonder why. Like, was all this just festering? I mean, what's interesting in the movie is that somebody, I forget who it was, kind of pointed to Obama as like, we didn't have, a post-racial America with Obama. Obama ignited all of this stuff. And then someone like Trump came along and just ran with it. And so it's stunning to see how quickly we could devolve into this ugliness again.
Look, I mean, I think Obama would have been, I think if we'd had any other Republican Party in office that we've had in the last 30 years, you might have had a much different response to Obama. I mean, I think that, that Fox News, the Republican media machine recognized, I think Rush Limbaugh plays an outsized role in this because he tells, he messages conservative radio that racial fear mongering is okay, right? I mean, Rush is the precursor to Fox, and Trump is an outgrowth of a response. I don't think that Obama. I mean, you could imagine if you'd had any other Republican administration running against him, and they might have been much more agreeable, and they might have been much more excited about it. There's this wonderful moment when Nancy Pelosi is elected Speaker of the House, and George Bush, as a sort of chooses a sort of respectable, elegant response, and he says for the first time, he wants to welcome a female Speaker of the House. That kind of cross the aisle warmth to a progressive idea is no longer the standard, and so the party made a decision. I mean, yes, Americans were upset by Obama, but I think Americans respond to what the engine is doing. I think that Americans are, I don't want to say, I think Americans are controllable. That's why they respond to this rage so much. If the message had repeatedly been, let's warm up to them. There's this wonderful speech, another speech that Reagan and Bush give and I think it was Ellis Island or the Statue of Liberty, Ellis Island, 40 years ago, where they talk about how America is this wonderful nation of immigrants. It's a beautiful speech. You can look it up. And nobody got upset about that. People welcomed the idea, right? We are able, with enormous Republican establishment power, which is what Reagan and Bush had. They were not marginal presidents. We as a people can respond warmly to people of color when we're told that it's the right thing to do. What these guys have done is they've recognized that the path to power is through the race baiting, the hate, the rage, and the fear. And so they've destroyed It's a small group of people that have destroyed this. This is not like, I don't believe that America was ready to become racist again. America does whatever it's told. Have you ever seen the movie Wall-E, where they're all on a big spaceship, 1,000 people, they're all in these carts, and they drive around in these golf carts, like the things that you see at Walmart for the person who can't walk, for example, that is disabled. And there's thousands of them on this boat, on this airplane, or whatever it is, spaceship. And one of them says, have you heard? The new color is red. And they push a button and everybody's shirt changes red. The entire society changes shirt from blue to red because red is what's in. People follow like lemmings. They follow this stuff.
Yeah.
And so these guys are destroying our society with this hate.
Well, what you're speaking to is leading by example, where our elected leaders are supposed to be the ones who inspire us, lift us up. They serve as the catalyst for change and progress. And I think you're raising a good point in that the leaders today are doing the opposite of that. And unfortunately, what we're also learning is that the system of checks and balances, of co-equal branches of government, oversight, all of that good stuff that we thought the founding fathers had buttoned up, that you can drive a Mack truck through. Because what happens if Congress decides to abdicate its constitutional responsibility and authority and hand over its authority to the executive branch, which is basically what it's done. And so we have this landscape today where you have someone like Trump who not only controls the executive, he controls Congress, hopefully not for that much longer. He also, which is really terrifying when you think about it from a civil rights standpoint, from a voting rights standpoint, he controls the Department of Justice and the FBI. So these are really unprecedented times. But, when you think about it, I always try to get in the minds of the people I question. So I think about like white replacement. Is it legit in some way, in some twisted way? So, for example, in your film, you cite, according to the latest census data, that only 1 in 10 new Americans is white. And a majority of those 15 and under are non-white. Doesn't justify hatred and racism and racial violence, but they are stunning statistics.
Well, Stuart Stevens quotes that. I don't know where he got that from. I mean, it's based on something. I don't remember exactly how the data shakes up. But America is turning black and brown. I mean, there's no question about it. I mean, the whites will still be the biggest group, but they won't be the majority anymore. I don't know that being the majority even really matters all that much if you're 51 or 49. We've never won or lost elections because white Americans were 51 or 49. I mean, only a very small percentage of the people turn out for some of these votes. I mean, you start getting into local elections and certain things, and the turnout is just abysmally small. I mean,
right.
If every white voted, they would completely dominate the electorate. There's no, whites are no longer the majority. That's just a scare number. That's not that number has no practicality in anything. The other point I'll point out is just, how the American population follows this stuff. Okay. Do you remember when Bill Clinton is accused of, cheating on his wife with Jennifer Flowers and then later accused of cheating on his wife with, what's her name? Lewinsky. And the Republican right lost their mind. This was a group that had been describing itself as the moral majority, right? A group that defined itself as people who cared so deeply about the soul of an aborted baby that they were willing to go to any lengths to protect abortion rights. Now, okay, I'll go with that. Let's assume you really believe that. Mm-hmm. I will do my very best to respect that point of view. But this is a group that then said, when Donald Trump was caught cheating on his wife, well, the Bible says forgive. Now, why this dichotomy, right? Why is it that under one standard, this is an infraction that is worthy of practically the death penalty, and under another standard, they offer Jesus' message of forgiveness? Where was Jesus' message of forgiveness 30 years ago with the Clinton administration? It didn't exist. And this is why I point out that they'll do whatever they're told. Mm-hmm. They'll respond to whatever they are if they are given the right, fishing lure, and they can reel them in. I mean, I pride myself on the fact that I'm not. I try very hard to not be susceptible to any of this bullshit messaging. If I can be, so swear. I get it from both parties. They lie to me, both of them, all the time, mm-hmm. and I'm aware of it. What I never do is get wrapped up into it. And you got to think to yourself, these people that Trump hires who put aside their values and follow his mission, when the issues that when it's their job to follow his values, just an administrator, that's one thing. But when to do so requires lying or using the Justice Department as a weapon, to me, that is such a sad example of a person who has such a small moral center that they're willing to throw their moral center out the window in order to further their career. That to me is it's like something I would never teach my children. It's such a bad set of values. And in a certain sense, you have to look at someone like a Pam Bondi or a Kristi Noem and just think that they're so functionally and fundamentally pathetic. Regardless of your politics, I could be a full-blown Republican. I could love Trump, and I would look at them and I would say, really? I mean, you would act out in such an unethical way. It's very sad and it's very sick. It's a kind of mental illness in a certain sense.
Well,
and it's something I would never teach my children.
Yeah, well, the scariest part of your film is what it could mean on a broader sense in this country and in the world. I mean, we're both Jews, and I think as Jews, we're acutely aware of the Holocaust, Nazi Germany, not just what happened in the mid-40s, but how it started in the late 20s. And when you look at some of the things that are happening today, and white replacement fear is at the root of a lot of it. And what you just said about how people just, march in lockstep and take orders from the big guy, no matter how unconscionable or how dangerous they may be, you start to think like, well, this is how it happened in Germany, right?
Listen, first of all, there's two issues. One is the Jewish issue. When I would talk about this when this film first was a concept, which was in 2021 or even late 2020, when we first were batting this around in the heels of George Floyd and everything like that, right? We were saying, let's look at World War II as an example of this huge racial animus going to its extreme. And is that a possibility? And the response generally was Jews are not first in line because there were Muslims in this country, there were immigrants, and there were blacks. Those are the most hated groups. Now, with the post-October 7th behavior and everything that's happening both in Europe and the United States, Jews have moved up that list. And I don't know where they are on that list, but I can tell you that, the blacks, the Democrats, the blacks, the Muslims, LGBTQ people all have a home in the Democratic Party. The Jews do not. The Democratic Party has made it very, very clear that we are not your home. And if you think you have a backup home in Israel, then we're really not your home. And so I think that Jews have nowhere to hide right now. There is no safe haven for Jews in the Democratic Party, the Republican Party, or frankly, in the public sphere. And so this is a very, very scary time. And we shouldn't assume that because America is democratic, that because America has institutions, that ultimately has certain institutions that didn't exist in Nazi Germany, that any ethnic group is going to have a safe place here. We locked everybody up in World War II who was Japanese. Not everybody, but many. We are now ripping people out of their cars, out of their streets, and with their children, and separating them at the border, and deporting them on airplanes to the farthest corners of the globe. We have an armed population, which is something that Germany didn't have. So you look at and we have social media. All they had was radio, and look what they pulled off with just the radio. We are a cocktail bomb, or whatever it's called, a Molotov waiting to explode here. And a severe economic downturn, which we could see with the advent of AI, which is going to be, by a lot of measures, potentially very damaging to the white-collar establishment. And the white-collar establishment controls all the levers of power in a way that the rest of the country does not. This is not a place that we should assume at all will be safe for anybody who's deemed a minority. Yeah. And I'm making a film now on anti-Semitism. About this very specific issue. Jews in particular need to be very conscious of whether or not they're going to have a home here and whether or not democracy is going to last here. And frankly, in Europe, I mean, Jews have it worse in Europe. I mean, you cannot go to a public school in most parts of Paris now if you're a Jew. It's just not safe for you. You'll either get hated for being a Jew because you're somehow pro-Israel, and pro-Israel sentiment is much stronger in those communities. They don't have that strong division here, in the Jewish population. or the Islamic fundamentalists will physically put you in some sort of threat in France. And you see similar things in Sweden. You see similar things in Belgium. We were there. I mean, I went and interviewed all these people who've been murdered, not the people who were murdered, the people around them. It's terrifying for Jews. But in America, if I was a Muslim right now, if I was Hispanic, the threat of deportation. I mean, I was talking to this guy who was working on our house. He's I think he's Guatemalan. He's an American citizen, but he was telling me that where he lives in Danbury, there's whole neighborhoods, and they're just roaming through his neighborhood, collecting all of his friends and neighbors. I mean, it's a scary idea, right? Just being scooped up off the street for whatever reason. You don't have to be a Democrat to be upset by a lot of these things. Yeah. And frankly, I always point out I'm not some far left guy. I never have been. I mean, I'm a very moderate, reasonable person. No one's ever been able to tag me as a member of either party. First of all, I'm a journalist, so I don't really get into it, but I'm happy to share with you to some extent. I'm reasonably moderate in this stuff. And I see things that are very, very concerning from the Republican Party. By the way, the Democratic Party makes its share of mistakes too. I can go a long way with either side, and I don't like what I see. So it's concerning.
Well, we're going to see today just where America is, because the military may be given orders to commit either genocide or some other military actions against civilian targets in Iran. Now we know why those 6 Democrats made that video a few months ago about the military not following illegal orders. Because I think we're getting to a point in this country where this mad sociopath, who really doesn't care about anything or anyone in the world but himself, could very well give an order. I mean, he literally posted today that he's going to annihilate an entire civilization. Those were his words. That is beyond scary. I mean, we've never, ever had anything that's even remotely close to that kind of rhetoric. But let's say he does give an order. What are the generals going to do? What is the military going to do? What is the rank and file going to do? And then all of a sudden, the leap from the United States to early 40s Germany isn't so big, And that's the real scary part.
You can go, and I don't know this firsthand, but you can go to any military base, and I'm told by I made a film about the U.S. Army some years back, and honoring those who serve. It was called Proud to Serve. You can go to a military base, and the TV sets are all set to Fox News. Yeah. He's got his message being pumped into those places. I don't know much about whether or not anybody would follow it. I know that they're getting rid of a lot of the old school generals and leadership. And because a lot of those guys grew up, those are older guys. They grew up on the heels of Vietnam, the problems with, conflict. And, I think that each generation forgets. I mean, people would never have been talking about socialism. This guy, Mamdani, imagine that when we were kids, a guy running on a message that was so close to communism. He would have been not taken very seriously because those messages weren't taken seriously. But all the people that were telling us communism was bad are gone. They're not in power anymore. They're old. You don't listen to your 90-year-old grandpa. We did, because the 90-year-old grandpa when we were kids was 50, but now he's 90 and he's, not driving politics. And so they just cycle through, and that's why I think anti-Semitism, when we were kids, the Holocaust was looming large. The single biggest thing to stop anti-Semitism in American history, right, was the Holocaust. Nothing got rid of anti-Semitism or reduced it or pushed the mute button more than the Holocaust. But now as that generation dies off, our great leader of that voice, Elie Wiesel, died a few years ago. I mean, so who's talking about that? To the Holocaust is to these kids what like the Civil War was to us, these black and white photos of people that we have no relationship with.
Yeah. No, that is so true, and that's a shame. In the film, you interview a lot of insiders, people who were in the rooms where stuff happened, people like Hillary Clinton, former Trump political advisor Sam Nunberg, Steve Bannon, but Nunberg is always a fascinating character. Were you surprised at their candor, and did anything they say in particular genuinely shock you?
Bannon is very transparent. He's a difficult guy to get things to work things out with. He's not easy. Everything is yes, no, whatever. I mean, that's both his skill set and his Achilles heel. I mean, I think it's both for him.
Yeah.
He's a very effective guy. I mean, you got to give him credit for his effectiveness, whether or not you agree with him. But nothing he said particularly surprised me. I was a little surprised at how open he was, but I was asking him some very factual stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Sam Nunberg, I was surprised that he said stuff that was practically incriminating. I mean, he's like, oh, I wanted to tell people that the cartels were after you. He says something
Right.
like that.
I wanted to ask you about that because that, to me, if I had to pick one thing that I walked away from your film with,
Yeah.
and it was scratching my head, it was that. Because there's a lot of people who think that assassination attempt in Butler, Pennsylvania, on Trump was staged, and I go back and forth, and I'm like, that can't be. Well, maybe, but then when I'm listening to Nunberg, I'm like, this was on the table about faking a kidnapping to, and I'm like, holy shit, it is not. It is not that far-fetched, in my opinion. Let's just say that.
Look, I think that stage. First of all, my gut tells me just because of the kid and everything like that it wasn't. But you know about that when Trump gets shot in the ear and he stands the. My gut tells me no. Just because it was just kind of they figured out who he was and there wasn't much there. But I think staging a stunt isn't necessarily the conspiracies that they allude to. The ideas that there's this enormous left-wing conspiracy out to dilute the pool of patriots, as what's her name says in the film, and all of this. Mm-hmm. Those things to me are kind of preposterous, just because the government can barely build a sidewalk. So I don't know how they're going to pull that off without anybody knowing about it, or that there's this huge conspiracy to steal the vote. I find that all kind of odd and bizarre, that there's so many people working, sort of the way you'd see in some kind of an Oliver Stone movie or something like that. But Trump pulling off some staged event to hire some kid to do a thing at a thing, that could be done with 3 or 4 people. But the guy ended up dead. So my gut tells me, who wants to, do something so stupid around a bunch of sharpshooters unless you're really a moron, although they could recruit a moron. Well, so my gut tells me no on that one. I'm going to go with no.
Last question. After people watch your film, what do you want to have happen? Do you want them to do anything differently? Is the film about awareness per se, or accountability, voting behavior, or something deeper, all of the above perhaps?
I've never been a call to action guy. If somebody in a film wanted to say something, I go vote or something like that. But I think that people need to know that they're being manipulated. It's a shame that, we don't reach as many people as we did. The show just aired on PBS nationally. Of course, it's available now on Amazon and Apple and PBS Passport and a million other ways. It's a big digital release on top of it being broadcast on national TV, on top of it being opening in movie theaters. And now it's got educational. But you still don't reach that many people. And even if you do, they don't believe you sometimes. I remember I sat with this very smart woman who was very, very wealthy. And I was asking her if she would make a contribution to a film I was making about Jewish history. And she started to tell me something like about her love of Donald Trump. And this was right when all the women were accusing Trump. And I was like, so many women have accused him. How do you feel about that? I just wanted to know. And she said, well, they lie. I said, all of them? She said, yeah, they're all lying. Mm. And I was like, well, really? What? I don't even know what to do with that. I was like, you may want to vote for him, but just to assume they're all lying? I don't know how she could have that cognitive dissonance. So she may watch my film and just think it's just a big lie.
Yep. Well, that's where we are in this country, which I think brings us back to the beginning of this conversation. And that is, we're in a very toxic, partisan, polarized place today. And this white fear is taking a lot of people to a place that even they perhaps never thought they were capable of going to. The things that have been said out in the open today, people are saying the quiet parts out loud again, and that's scary.
I think this has become solidified as the new normal. At first, we were all in shock, and I think this kind of, conversation is the new normal. And I don't know, historically, when we've had situations like this where sort of fascist or fascistic ideologies were growing at such a rapid rate when people then reversed it without an enormous violent eruption. This stuff often leads to a great rearranging of societies, whether it's, world wars or internal revolutions and things like that, or you get dictators who govern with an iron fist. And that's a scary idea because, members of, the right wing are not standing up internally. People keep, every once in a while that Congress will do something against Trump and they'll say, is this the end of Trump's grip on power? I don't know. You got to ask yourself, people think, I will say, I think what Trump does would be hard to duplicate because there are very few leaders that are as charismatic, as funny, as clever, as manipulative, and as willing to go off the deep end as he is.
Or sociopathic.
Right. But I don't know. I don't know about that. I mean, I don't know. Like, I'm not a shrink, but maybe. But the question is, would the next leader need to be as charismatic? Because if the whole model has shifted to the right, could just a regular, hardcore guy do it? Like, for example, just saying, what if Pete Hegseth ran for president? And so you get to, what if Hegseth ran? I don't think a Kash Patel would win because he's, too unlikable. But I don't know. Hegseth was a successful guy on TV. I mean, that unedited rage and hate and vitriol is a turn on to this political base.
If you believe that Trumpism, if MAGA is a cult, then he's the cult leader. And history has shown us, for the most part, that when the cult leader dies, so goes the cult. I happen to agree with you, for the most part, that he's a one-of-a-kind phenomenon. I give him credit. I call him an evil genius because that's what he is. To his people, he has a special sauce that is truly yummy. And I don't think you can get that at any other restaurant. And so I think when he goes, much of this kind of swallows up into a black hole. I don't think of Hegseth. I don't think of J.D. Vance, Marco Rubio. These are lightweights, and a lot of people don't like them. Trump got a lot of people to like him, I mean, in this last election, he got a small majority, but a majority of people to like him and vote for him. So I think he's the problem, and when he goes, I think a good chunk of the problems can start to go away. But it is a very scary place that he's brought us to. Andrew, great conversation. Good luck with the film. It's truly terrific. Everybody watch it. You can stream it everywhere.
Thank you.
All righty. Take care.
I appreciate it.
This episode was produced and edited by me, Andy Ostroy. It was co-produced by Matty Rosenberg and Jen Hammoud for Radio Free Rhiniecliff, with additional editing by Matty Rosenberg, music by Andrew Hollander, and graphic design by Cricket Lengyel. And with a special thanks to our sponsor, The Epicurean. Again, thanks for listening. Please rate and review wherever you get your podcasts, and subscribe to the Backroom with Andy Ostroy YouTube channel, where you can watch full videos of our interviews. See you next time.